inside of everybody's head, inside of everybody's head. There's a hum, there's a never ending hum. And no one ever seems to notice it, no one seems to notice it. You might never notice it, never, ever, never, ever, until now. Deep in the dankest corners of the human mind of any given person that you happen to see, there is a creature, or more specifically, a critter hiding and sitting in the churning, boiling philosophical pot of self-aware chatter that we call thought. This creature has a name, but it's different for each person. Mine is named Corey, and it looks like an armadillo in kiss makeup. Picture your spirit in a delicatessen in the slums of the universe, open sign dangling, daring all parasites, giving you mosquito bites, sucking the life out of all of your customers. But fear not, it's your critter to the rescue, hum emanating from its lips. And fear disappears, parasite trips, lands in a puddle, and that's your rebuttal. The argument that you won't even listen to because of the never-ending hum.
Hello, hello. One second. I'm texting somebody. All right, sorry about that. Hello, hello, hello. How are we doing today, chat? Also, I've noticed that some people have been. I feel like I should say something about it, even though they're off stream. But I'm so thankful for like all the followers that follow, like even when I'm not live. Like college is starting back up again in a couple of weeks, and I have no idea if I'll have as much free time as I did in the first year, and even then I barely streamed during the school year. That's how little free time I had. And now I don't know if it's going to be the same amount of free time or less, and it's most likely going to be less. So expect less frequent streams when I go back up to college. That's not for another couple of weeks. So we'll see how things play out. All right. So, in the meantime, today we are going to be reading chapter 13 of Through a Glass Divine. If there are any new viewers, Through a Glass Divine is a Sleepy Boys Inc. Alternate universe fanfiction that I have been reading. It's probably going to be the last SBI or any Dream SMP AU fanfic for that matter that I'm going to read, because I want to kind of veer away from that stuff. I do want to start reading Generation Lost fanfiction. So I am 100% open to suggestions. If you want to suggest fanfics for me to read, you can check out my Discord. I have a suggestions channel there. Also, throughout the stream, I'm going to be picking apart this dark chocolate raspberry muffin. So if you ever hear me stop talking for a few seconds at a time, I'm either A, drinking water, or B, eating the muffin. Because a bitch has priorities. Oh no, crumb fell on the floor, and I don't know where it went. Shit. Oh wait, no, I think I found it. That is not the crumb, that is just a shadow of my shaggy carpet. Or, well, it's not a shag carpet per se. It's like a fluffy, you know, like the fluffy, actually, no, it is shag carpet. What am I saying? I guess it technically counts as shag carpet, so, in case you couldn't tell already, I had coffee today, so I'm a bit, like, I've been, like, it's a little bit better now that I've had some food in my system. I had dinner, like, 30 minutes before this. 15 minutes before this. I thought I did a decent job of, like, balancing out the caffeine in my system with drinking water, but I guess I didn't drink enough water. Or eat enough of the muffin. It is a huge-ass muffin, may I add. That's why it hasn't been... This was originally my mother's. We went to a coffee shop while we were waiting for our appointment at the DMV. My mom originally got the muffin for herself and, like, let me have a piece of it. But then she was like, this is too much for me. It's too much chocolate. You can have it. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to eat all of this in one setting. So I'm going to wrap it up and then eat it later. And this is me eating it later. Anyway, let's get on with the story. The main reason for my stream. Whoop. Alrighty. Sounded a little bit Welsh. Alright. That's probably the best Welsh accent I've ever done, and it was just one word. Anyway. Through a Glass Divine is written by Bones and the Bees. I highly recommend checking out her work. She writes amazing stories. On previous streams, I've read Tommy Knit's Clinic for Supervillains, Under the Brine, Nocturnal Animals, and The Stars and Their Children. I think in that specific order, now that I think about it. I have such a good memory. Geez, this was published in the beginning of the year. And I'm only just now getting to it. That's crazy how long it's crazy how long I've been reading this story. It takes me a while to get through this shit, gonna be honest. Shit/pause. Anyway, let's get on with it. Chapter 13. A Shrike in Hand. Summary. Tommy has to go on a supply run. No trigger warnings. Alrighty. The Pythia woke up to someone shaking him awake. Will? Tommy asked, his voice low. Will, wake up. Blinking open his eyes, the Pythia stared at the empty wall behind his bed. Tommy's voice coming from behind him. He tensed to roll over so he could face him, only stopping himself at the last second when he realized he wasn't wearing his blindfold. Fear washed over him like a bucket of ice water. Shit! He exclaimed, rolling into his pillow to hide his face. Tommy, what the fuck? You know what to do! I didn't see a face. It's fine, Tommy said, cutting him off. I just wanted to tell you I'm gonna be gone today. Another wave of fear as a shudder ran down the Pythia's spine. His sleep-addled mind struggled to understand what Tommy meant by that, but before he could even ask, Tommy was grabbing his hand and placing something silky in it. You might want to put this on, Tommy told him. His blindfold. Right. That first, then he could ask Tommy what the fuck was going on. Hold on, I got a text. He was careful to keep his back to Tommy as he tied the blindfold around his head once more. In the back of his mind, he wondered why he still cared so much about not letting Tommy see what he looked like under the blindfold. Tommy already knew that name. He already knew that Schlatt never listened to him. He already knew so many things he wasn't supposed to. What was one more thing to add to the pile? It didn't matter. But something inside of him kept telling him not to turn around until the blindfold was secure over his face. To keep up the illusion of following the rules until he absolutely couldn't anymore. Besides, the Pythia had bigger things to deal with right now. What the fuck do you mean you're... The Pythia cut himself off when he turned to face Tommy. In the temple, Tommy usually alternated between an array of brightly colored sweaters, hoodies, and sweatshirts. Sometimes he wore cargo pants, a lot of the times he wore sweatpants. Casual clothes meant for lounging. The only time his style changed was when they went to Quackity's bar, and he'd wear something slightly more presentable, but still seemed fairly comfortable. Tommy's current clothes were all about utility, though. One second. Cleaning my glasses. And I can't really read if I can't see. His black cargo pants and work boots were the same, but the dark red jacket that fell to his hips and was also covered in pockets was not. He also had a black bandana tied around his neck, ready to be pulled up to cover his face, and a dark backpack slung over his shoulder. Hello! Lunicorn Alicorn. I don't think I'm... Wait, is this... Trying to figure out if I knew you or not. Sorry, that sounded a bit strange. Maybe? I read your username and I thought it said Leannicorn. I almost called you Leanne, but I do not know if it's you or not. Oof. Oh, you're from Bexy's Discord. Hello. Hello. I think it's been a... Am I in Bexy's Discord server? I'm not sure if I am. I might be. I'm not really active in many Discord servers, gonna be honest. But I'm just scrolling through my Discord servers. That's Charlie's. I'm not seeing it. Wait, I am in Bexy's server? Why am I not? Am I just blind? Hold on. Either there's an announcement. That's my Discord server. Oh wait, oh no, oh, I think I know what happened. I might have left Bexy's server because I'm not really that active in it. But it might be because Bexy, like, put me on a, like a, what's it called? I don't know how people do it, but it's like an automatic notification in Discord servers when people go live. Bexy might have done that for me. Or it's completely possible I never joined the server and they still did that, because I don't have to be in the server to do that, I don't think. Maybe. I don't know why I'd leave Bexy's server, though. Thanks for the follow. Streamcord. That makes sense. That makes sense how people do it. Thanks for the follow. I'm reading, an SBI AU fanfiction. I said this in the beginning of stream, but, this is probably going to be the last SBI/Dream SMP fanfiction that I'm gonna read. There's quite a few chapters left of this, so it's gonna be a while before I finish it. But afterwards, I want to read other things, especially Generation Loss. No, it's okay. I'm also reading it out loud, so you don't have, like, I keep it on stream, so people can follow along if they so desire. But I also read along, so it provides both an audio and a visual representation of what I stream. If you have any suggestions for fanfic that you want me to read, I have a suggestions channel in my Discord, which you can find in that link. Oh shoot, I forgot to close Chatsin. Not Chatsin, Chatterino. I have 2 audio pings on Chatterino. Oh, you write sometimes. That's cool. Just a suggestion. /NF. Let's see. So this story that I'm reading is called Through a Glass Divine. It's basically religious trauma. Cyberpunk religious trauma. And it's fucking cool. Also, I do use voices. It helps with my immersion. And it also kind of helps me with, like, trying to do voice acting. Well, voices because they represent, like, the characters represent the streamers themselves, I use the accents that the streamers have. So, if it's cringe, I'm sorry. Whatever. Let's see, where was I? Right here. Also, at the beginning of the chapter, it didn't say any trigger warnings, so I would assume that things are in the clear. But if something happens that does happen to trigger you, there is no shame in doing whatever you need to do to feel safe. My viewers' safety is my #1 priority more than anything else. Alright. Right now, the backpack looked empty. The Pythia had a feeling it wouldn't be for long. Despite the haze of sleep still clouding his thoughts, the Pythia thought back to Tommy's conversation with Quackity a few days earlier at the bar. It was then the pieces fell into place. The supply run Quackity was talking about, the Pythia said, staring at a roll of bandages sticking out of one of Tommy's many pockets. Phil gave you the go-ahead. 1 second, I'm texting an IRL. Okay. Tommy nodded. He told me last night. I would have told you then, but you were passed out and I didn't want to wake you. But then Jack said we should leave early this morning, and I didn't want to just, disappear without saying anything. Let's see. The Pythia couldn't care less about how tired he was. He was too focused on the fact that Tommy was leaving. I mean, you're not going to be gone for long, right? The Pythia asked, too tired to care about how childish the question sounded. At this, Tommy grimaced. We should get back pretty late tonight, but sometimes shit just goes south and we gotta hide out for a while. So I might end up getting back sometime tomorrow. The Pythia's eyes widened. What do you mean by things going south? Well, cops chasing us, Tommy said, eyes darting around the room like he was trying to avoid the Pythia's gaze even with the blindfold. Also cameras. We've got to keep an eye out for cameras so surveillance can't track us back to the temple. Fuck. It was just what the Pythia had been afraid of. He thought back to the first time Tommy had shown him his tattoos. How he'd shown off the sun wrapped around a circular scar, explaining how he'd been shot by a cop like he was talking about getting rained on. The bird was slow to stir this time. It blinked a few times, like it was trying to get its bearings, but stiffened as soon as it realized the danger Tommy was about to be in. What if you can't outrun the cops? The Pythia asked, wincing when the bird let out a shrill chirp. Tommy raised an eyebrow. That won't happen. You don't know that, though, the Pythia argued. You might get cornered, or you might trip, or more cops might show up than what you expect, or... I know all of that, Tommy snapped, his eyes narrowing. I'm not a fucking idiot, Wilbur. I've done this shit before. The Pythia clenched his jaw. That doesn't change the fact that it's dangerous. Tommy stared at him for a moment. Brows furrowed as something unreadable flashed over his eyes. After a beat, though, his eyes widened in surprise. Wait, are you worried about me? Of course I'm fucking worried about you, the Pythia exclaimed. So much shit can happen out there. I know you've said you've done it before, but that doesn't mean you can't be taken by surprise, or get fucked over, or even just get fucking shot again. With that last part, he poked the spot on Tommy's chest where he remembered the gunshot scar was, and Tommy flinched back. Shit! He exclaimed, holding his hands up in mock surrender. I didn't think you'd be this upset. In all fairness, the Pythia didn't think he'd be this upset either. But the bird was growing louder, and so was the buzzing in his head. He couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I'm sorry, I'm a little freaked out, I guess. The Pythia huffed, folding his arms over his chest. Tommy's frown deepened. I mean, Will, you got nothing to worry about. Nothing's gonna happen, but even if it does, Phil and Techno aren't gonna let anything happen to you here. Oh. Tommy thought he was worried about himself. While the Pythia was worried for his own safety, his outburst had nothing to do with that. Instead, All he could think about, all he could think of was what would become of his days here without Tommy around. What he would do if he never heard his loud rambling or blunt curses again. It brought him back to the other night, when he had the opportunity to leave, but couldn't bring himself to move. In a way, he felt like a tower of blocks swaying in the breeze. All it would take was one block taken from the bottom for him to fall apart completely. And for some reason, his mind had decided Tommy was one of the blocks that kept him standing. "Will?" Tommy asked when he was silent for a moment. "Wilbur? You there?" "I trust that Phil and Techno aren't gonna let the others kill me," the Pythias said, although he didn't know how much he believed his own words. He paused, taking a moment to gather his words. "Don't die. Please." Another unreadable emotion flashed over Tommy's face, but it was gone as soon as it appeared, quickly replaced by a shit-eating grin. "Don't worry. They don't call me the biggest man alive for nothing," Tommy declared, proudly puffing out his chest. Despite the fear still wrapping him in a vice, the Pythia couldn't help but snort. "Literally no one calls you that. Yet, Wilbur. No one calls me that yet," Tommy corrected. "I'm gonna be fine, because I'm the best runner there is. I'm like lightning, Will. They barely see me coming because they're a bunch of pussies who can't run for shit." "I wouldn't say that to their faces if I were you." Tommy snorted. "Actually, I call them pussy-ass bitches all the time because that's what they are. They need to be more humble like me, so I'm giving them life lessons, you know?" "At least vary it up," the Pythia said, smiling now. "Make sure to tell the cops they're also a bunch of pigs." "You see, I would, but that'd be insulting to actual pigs," Tommy shot back, still grinning as he got to his feet. The Pythia stood up as well. "That's fair. Pigs are actually very intelligent creatures." "And the cops are not," Tommy agreed. "Now I gotta head out, but Nikki's gonna come by soon to take you to breakfast. That sound good?" Oh, thank fuck. While the Pythia wasn't thrilled at the idea of walking around the temple without Tommy by his side, if he had to have someone else, Nikki would have been his first choice. "That's fine, yeah." Nodding once, Tommy glanced around the room, his eyes lingering on the door. "I should, get going then, I think," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Before Tommy could turn to leave, the Pythia reached out to put his hand on Tommy's shoulder, squeezing it once. "Be careful." Tommy's smile softened, and he gave the Pythia another nod. "I will." And with that, the Pythia dropped his hand, and Tommy turned on his heel to leave the room. The door slammed shut behind him, and the Pythia stared at the metal, his gut already twisting with anxiety the second Tommy was out of his line of sight. "One second, I'm gonna eat some of my muffin. And hope it doesn't crumble on the floor." Sorry, I was also drinking some water. The few days that had passed since they'd gone to Quackity's bar had been a blur. The The Pythia did his best not to think about his missed opportunity at escape, because it wasn't like he didn't know why he hadn't been able to make himself leave. He knew that if he actually considered the question, the answer would be right in front of his face. But he didn't want that answer. He didn't want to put it into words because it shouldn't be the truth. It was easier to let it hang around the edges of his mind like a formless haze instead of confronting it head on. Although the Pythia was still avoiding that question, everything else had been pulled back into sharp focus. Excuse me. Tommy was gone now, and there was a chance he might not come back. Nausea crawled up his throat, and he began to pace up and down the length of his room, not knowing what else to do with the nervous energy buzzing under his skin. Thankfully, he only had to pace for a few minutes before there was another knock at his door. "Hello?" he called out hesitantly. "Pythia?" A soft voice called back. "It's Nikki." Although the Pythia knew it wasn't going to be Tommy coming to tell him he'd changed his mind, the small balloon of hope in his chest deflated anyway. "You can come in," he said, sighing as he dropped back onto his bed. The door creaked open, Nikki poking her head through the gap and smiling when she spotted him on the bed. "Did Tommy—" "Yeah, he already told me," he said, cutting her off. "You're my god today, right?" Nikki nodded, opening the door a little wider. "I guess you can call me that." She glanced around the room, noticing the twisted pile his blankets had ended up in on his mattress, and the way his arms were wrapped around his knees. "Do you want to go to the cafeteria for breakfast? We can eat in here too if you'd prefer." Despite the fact that the Pythia really did not want to be in the cafeteria when he felt like he was on the verge of turning into dust, the idea of staring at the walls of his room while his mind ran through all the different ways Tommy could die today sounded downright torturous. At the very least, it would be a distraction. An unpleasant distraction, but a welcome one nonetheless. "We can go there," he told her, pushing to his feet and shaking out the buzzing in his arms. At this, Nikki's smile grew as she held the door open for him. "Let's hurry up then. I made more dough for the bread rolls yesterday, so they should be fairly fresh today." Nodding, the Pythia hurried out of the room to follow Nikki down the hall. For the first minute, the two walked in silence. Their footsteps echoed off the walls of the corridor, the faint purple glow of the enchantments on Nikki's arms lighting their way alongside the electric bugs flying over their heads. They passed into the main chamber of the temple, but instead of making their way across to the cafeteria, Nikki turned to walk towards the statue of Kristen. "Sorry, it'll only be a minute. I haven't prayed to her today, yet," Nikki explained, flashing him an apologetic look as she knelt in front of the base of the statue. It had been a while since the Pythia had stood this close to Kristen's statue. Her hologram arm flickered every few seconds, pink light bouncing off the dark stone of the other arm. The flickering almost made the specks of white in the stone look like they were twinkling, once again reminding the Pythia of starlight. This close to the statue, the Pythia could once again feel Kristen's gaze on his shoulders. Her head was tilted down, her smile feeling as though it was directed at him specifically. The hair on the back of his neck stood straight, refusing to look up at the statue. If he didn't acknowledge her, then maybe she would return the favor. Instead of meeting Kristen's eyes, the Pythia kept his focus on Nikki. She was kneeling in front of the statue, eyes shut and metal hands rested on the edge of the stone. Her lips were moving, but he couldn't make out anything she was saying. After a moment, she stopped speaking, but didn't open her eyes. A beat passed, then another. If the Pythia hadn't been watching Nikki, he would have missed the chill that ran down her spine as goosebumps appeared on her shoulders. For the briefest of moments, something so serene flashed over her face. The Pythia felt like he was intruding just by standing near her. Is that how he looked to others when he prayed to Clara's statue back at the palace? No. Somehow, he knew that he'd never looked that at peace when praying to Clara in the past. Suddenly, a small smile flickered over Nikki's face, and with one more murmured word, her eyes fluttered open. "Okay, that's all," she told him, pushing to her feet again. "You ready to go?" The Pythia forced himself to nod, the buzzing having only grown louder as his head spun with thoughts of both Tommy's safety and his relationship with Clara. Nikki nudged his shoulder with her own, still smiling as she led him out of the main chamber and towards the cafeteria. Besides the absence of Tommy and Jack, the cafeteria seemed the same as it always was. Tubbo, Rambu, and Amesy were off in their own corner, Sam and Pong sat near a wall, and Phil and Techno were standing near the front where all the trays of food were. The Pythia sat at their usual spot, ignoring the confused looks coming from Tubbo's side of the room. Nikki came back only a minute later, balancing 2 trays loaded with food in each hand. The Pythia got up to grab his own, before taking a bite of his soy eggs as soon as he sat back down again. A few minutes passed in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, but it wasn't comfortable either. Nikki flashed him small smiles whenever she caught his eye, but didn't seem to know how to start a conversation. The Pythia was in the same boat, because in the past, it was always Jack or Tommy who started up their morning conversations. Their absence was like an invisible, gaping hole torn in the air between him and Nikki, and neither one of them was sure what to do about it. As the Pythia tried to imagine what Jack would say to get them talking, there was movement from the corner of his eye, and a rock dropped into his gut. "Where's Tommy?" Looking up, the Pythia tried not to flinch when he saw Tubbo staring down at him and Nikki. Putting down her fork, Nikki tensed. He and Jack are out on a supply run. More footsteps echoed off the walls, and the Pythia saw Rambu and Amesy walking up behind Tubbo, both looking just as confused as he was. "Really?" Tubbo asked, raising an eyebrow. "Wonder how he got Phil and Techno to agree to that." Nikki shrugged. "I think Jack said something about Quackity getting involved, but I don't know the details." "Wait, so if Tommy's gone, who's watching him?" Rambu chimed in, pointing at the Pythia over Tubbo's shoulders. The Pythia couldn't help but huff at this. "Take a wild fucking guess," he said, gesturing towards Nikki. "And you're not, worried that he's gonna make a break for it?" Tubbo pushed, eyes flickering back to Nikki. "I think if he did, Nikki could handle things perfectly fine," Amesy cut in, giving Tubbo a sharp look. Tubbo flushed. I didn't mean she couldn't handle it. I just meant... He paused, dragging his hands through his hair and taking a breath to steady himself. Look. Forget about the Pythia. Nikki, are you sure it's safe for Tommy to be out doing a supply run? He hasn't been out since the ball. It was then the Pythian noticed that despite the narrowed-eyed looks Tubbo kept shooting his way, more than anything, Tubbo seemed nervous. Although his expression gave nothing away, he kept crossing and uncrossing his arms, and his fingers twitched like he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. Tubbo! Wait, Tubbo, come on. You think Phil and Techno would have agreed if they thought he was in danger? Amesy pointed out. Rambo nodded. Also, he's got Jack with him. It's not exactly comforting, Tubbo deadpanned. Nikki frowned. Is there anything else you need, Tubbo? Or can we go back to eating? Tubbo's mismatched eyes flickered towards him again, but he did his best not to shrink back. This was the closest Tubbo had been to him since the debate they had over whether or not they wanted to kill him, and the Pythia couldn't ignore how the buzzing under his skin was getting worse by the second. Yeah. Fine. Whatever. Tubbo muttered after a few seconds, taking a step back. Let us know if you need anything, though, Nikki. I'll let you know, Nikki said, in a tone that clearly meant, I'm not going to need you. As Tubbo and Rambu turned on their heels to head back to their side of the cafeteria, Amesy stayed where they were. Tubbo noticed their absence, looking over his shoulder and giving them a confused look. Amesy? Amesy ignored him and crouched down in front of him and Nikki. Is it okay if I join you guys? Huh? Unlike Tubbo, there was no suspicion lingering in Amesy's gaze when they looked at the Pythia. No worry. No caution, just curiosity. I promise I won't, be weird or anything, Amesy continued, cutting Nikki off. I get that Tubbo's been a bit intense lately, and he's kinda just stressed and worried about shit, so I get it. But I also know he hasn't been the nicest. So I'm just saying I'm not going to be pulling anything. Nikki furrowed her brows, staring at Amesy for a moment before her eyes flickered to the Pythia. Is it okay with you? She asked him, her voice soft. The Pythia blinked, surprised that Nikki was asking him if he wanted Amesy there or not. Before he could even think of a response, Amesy jumped in with, You can't say no. They reassured him, giving him a small smile. Shit's been, off lately, so if you don't feel comfortable with me here, that's totally fine. You're not gonna offend me or anything. Although it had been a while since Tommy had sat with Tubbo, Amesy, and Rambu for their meals, the Pythia thought back to how Amesy had always been rather pleasant to talk to. They weren't suspicious of him like Tubbo was, but they weren't a bundle of nerves like Rambu either. The Pythia also remembered how during the debate for his life, Amesy had been adamantly on the side of not killing him. It's okay, the Pythia said, giving them a nod. You can stay. Amesy beamed. Great! Let me go grab my food. They pushed to their feet, running past Tubbo and Rambu to get their breakfast tray. The Pythia couldn't hear what they were saying to their friends, but their hands were moving wildly around, looking excited despite Tubbo's frown. With a small wave, Amesy then left Tubbo and Rambu and hurried back over to the rug he and Nikki were sitting on. Their bad leg wobbled slightly as they sat down in front of the two of them, but stayed smiling as they balanced their tray on their knees. You know, I'm kind of relieved that Tommy is back to doing supply runs, Amesy said as they scooped some soy eggs up with their fork. It's not that I mind doing them. Jack's fun to work with and all, but it's just exhausting. Oh, right. Amesy had gone on the last supply run with Jack. Did you guys run into any trouble? The Pythia asked before he could think twice. Amesy furrowed their brows, considering the question for a moment. Well, not technically. Ran into some cops, yeah, but that's to be expected pretty much. We were able to get them off our trail pretty quickly, but we had to wait ages for them to leave the area. How long? The Pythia pushed. What time did you get back? I think around 2 in the morning? Maybe 3. The Pythia clenched his jaw, looking back down at his tray and tearing off a piece of bread roll. The anxiety was making itself known again, even though he was trying to shove it down by focusing on his food. That's late, he muttered, his voice tight. Assuming Tommy and Jack don't have to hide behind a dumpster for 3 hours straight, they should be back a bit earlier, Amesy explained. But yeah, worst case scenario, you wake up tomorrow morning and things are back to normal. Taking an unsteady breath, the Pythia stared at the pieces of bread littering his tray, only then realizing he hadn't eaten a single bite of it. He had more than half his food left, but his stomach turned at the mere idea of eating anything else. I don't get how you both so calm about this, the Pythia snapped, head lifting from his tray to look between Nikki and Amesy. Getting chased by cops isn't normal, but you both are talking about it like it's a fucking walk in the park. Pushing the tray off his legs and onto the rug, he rested his hands in his lap instead. He twisted his fingers into the hem of the yellow and orange sweater he was wearing, picking at the loose threads and counting the color variations each time he tugged one loose. Yellow, orange, yellow. A beat passed, then another. The Pythia's breathing began to slow. I'm not calm, I promise you. The Pythia looked up and saw Nikki giving him a tight-lipped smile. What? I'm terrified for them. Every time we send people out, I'm always running the worst-case scenario through my head, trying to convince myself it won't happen. Nikki explained, her voice low. Jack's my best friend, so, you know, of course I'm extra scared when he goes out. But Tommy, Amesy, Techno, anytime some of us here have to leave the temple for Deathling stuff, I worry myself sick. That's why I stopped to pray to Kristen on our way over here. I was asking her to keep them safe. Oh. Even for non-deathlings, dealing with the police was something you wanted to avoid at all costs. Although the situation had always been bad, under Schlatt's rule, The pretenses of regulation had all but fallen away completely. Accidents happened more often than arrests did, but with a deathling it would practically be a guarantee. An arrest would be a death sentence. You seemed very relaxed after you prayed to her, the Pythia pointed out. Nikki nodded. She just reminded me of some things I already knew, but needed to hear again. Suddenly, Amesy chimed in with, Lady Death doesn't promise us anything, but it's nice to remember that if something does happen, she'll be waiting for us with open arms. Arms. No. He didn't want Lady Death to be waiting for Tommy with open arms. He wanted her to stay far away from him. It's not what I wanted to hear. He huffed, folding his arms over his chest to hide his shaking hands. You're worried about Tommy then? Amesy asked, raising an eyebrow. The Pythia wasn't sure how to respond to that. Not because he didn't know the answer. He'd told Tommy to his face earlier that he was worried about him. He just wasn't sure how Amesy would react to that, especially if they were going to tell Tubbo whatever he told them. Actually, who cared? If Amesy or Tubbo or whoever else didn't believe that he was genuinely worried for Tommy's safety, it didn't fucking matter. What were they gonna do? Punish him? Yeah, right. He already knew how unlikely that was. He nodded, and Amesy didn't seem surprised. You know about Tommy's death tattoos? Amesy then asked. The ones that represent near-death experiences? They nodded. Yeah, I've seen them. Tommy's got a lot, and that's part of what worries me. He takes a lot of risks. He does. But if I were you, I think about his tattoos this way, he said, holding their hands out for emphasis. All the tattoos you see aren't evidence of all the times he's almost died. They're evidence of all the times he's survived. Tommy has a talent for getting into bad spots, but he's even better at getting out of them. Oh. That reminded him of something he'd read in an old history text once when he was scouring the palace library. There'd been a diagram of airplanes used in war, showing where they were most often shot after they returned from battle. The logical solution was to add more armor to the parts of the plane that were shot at frequently, but the text had told him that that wasn't the right way to think about it. The diagram was made from the planes that had returned from battle, meaning that they had been able to return. The places that needed to be armored were the spots that didn't have as many bullet holes in them, because a plane was less likely to make it back if it had been shot there. Muffin time! Tommy had a lot of near-death experience tattoos because he'd been able to make it back and get those tattoos. Like Amesy said, he was good at getting himself out of bad spots. He could only hope that stayed true for this supply run as well. That helps, the Pythia said, giving Amesy a small nod. Thanks. Amesy hummed. Of course. It's not easy being the ones left behind. No, it really wasn't. After that, Amesy asked Nikki if she'd come up with any fun tattoo ideas lately. Nikki, who seemed eager for a change of the subject, began describing to Amesy an idea she had for a tattoo involving birds, with the Pythia only half listening as he waited for the two of them to finish their food. Soon enough, their trays were empty, save for his own, but Nikki and Amesy didn't comment on it, and it was time for them to leave. When they all stood, Amesy glanced between the exit and the spot across the room where Tubbo and Rambu were still sitting, looking as though they'd barely touched their food since Amesy had left. I should probably get back over there, Amesy said, giving them an apologetic look. Thanks for letting me eat breakfast with you guys, though. Of course. You should stop by my parlor soon, Nikki told them, her voice warm. Despite the anxiety that the Pythia had been drowning in for most of the conversation, he'd still been pleasantly surprised at how nice it was to talk to Amesy again. They were easy to talk to, and seemed to have a good sense for avoiding sensitive subjects. The Pythia didn't feel like every word he said in front of them was being scrutinized, unlike the times he'd spoken with Tubbo in the past. They were wholly, genuinely nice, and he appreciated that. Well, you could just eat with us more often, the Pythia added, keeping his arms crossed firmly over his chest. Amesy blinked. Oh, you'd be okay with that? They asked, their dark eyes wide. The Pythia nodded. Awesome! I've got to be honest. I've missed talking to you and Tom every morning during breakfast, Amesy said, beaming now. I'll join you guys tomorrow so I can hear all about Jack and Tommy's how Jack and Tommy's run went. That sounds good, Nikki said, smiling again. With that, Amesy turned on their heel and waved as they ran back towards Tubbo and Rambu. All right. Bye, guys! Nikki waved back, something in her eyes softening as she turned to look at the Pythia once more. She seemed like she wanted to say something, but after a moment of consideration, closed her mouth and held an arm out. An offer. The Pythia looped his arm through hers, and even through his sweater sleeve, he was able to feel how cold the metal was. But he found he didn't mind as Nikki led him out of the cafeteria and away from the heavy stares of the others. They began walking in the direction of Nikki's tattoo parlor, only for her to stop dead in her tracks in front of the archway to the main chamber. Shoot, I just remembered I left my sketchbook in my room, Nikki said, her brows furrowing as she glanced across the main chamber and towards the bedrooms. Would you mind if we go get it? Yeah, I don't care, the Pythia told her. Nodding, Nikki led him through the main chamber, keeping her arm looped through his as they walked. Even if it wasn't as calming as when Tommy grabbed his hand, the Pythia found his anxiety dying down again at the contact. When they made it back into the hallway where the bedrooms were, Nikki made a left instead of the right he would usually take to get back to his and Tommy's rooms. They walked down the dark hall, the floating lights bobbing above their heads and making the shadows dance along the walls. They passed a few doors painted with varying doodles, until they stopped in front of one absolutely covered in flowers. Pink, yellow, purple, orange, streaks of paint lifted from the bottom of the door, growing into tall, slender flowers that the Pythia didn't know the names of. Despite the artwork being made up of incoherent streaks of paint, together they formed a picture of a flower field that Pythia felt like he could dive headfirst into. Okay, 1 second. I've been wearing my binder for too long and I need to take it off. Alright, we're good. Of course this was Nikki's room. Even if she wasn't guiding him, he would have been able to tell just from the flowers alone. This is beautiful, the Pythia said as Nikki let go of his arm to open her door. Nikki followed his gaze to the flowers on the door and smiled. Just wait till you see inside. Then, before he could say anything else, she pushed open the door and gestured for him to step through. The layout of Nikki's room seemed to be the same as his own. Mattress in the corner, dresser settled across, one door opening to a bathroom, the other presumably leading to someone else's bedroom. If he was looking at it on a blueprint, he would say their rooms were exactly the same. That couldn't be further from the truth, though. The flowers on the door were only just the beginning of Nikki's painting skills. More flowers blossomed over the walls, with tall fronds of grass streaked in between. Swirls of random colors arched over the flowers, shifting and twisting like the wind itself. Multicolored stars also dotted the walls and ceiling at random, and the Pythia's head spun at how vibrant it all was. In a way, it almost reminded him of the royal atrium back at the palace. This song seems a lot louder than the last. Is the audio still good? Like, is the audio mixing still good? It's hard to tell. Let's hope this volume doesn't stay the same throughout the rest of this chapter. I think just for my sake though, it's really loud in my ears and it's not helping me focus. So I'm gonna turn it down just a teensy bit. It's much better. Put this back, there we go. In a way, it almost reminded him of the royal atrium back at the palace. Nature that was allowed to flourish, albeit in a contained space. Except that the plants in the royal atrium had been real, and Nikki's were only made of paint. But for some reason, he had a feeling that Nikki's room was far closer to what it would actually be like to stand in a field of flowers compared to the false impression of freedom the plants in the atrium gave off. Holy shit, the Pythia whispered, his eyes wide as he spun in a slow circle to take the paintings in. This is amazing. I'm sure it's not much compared to the real thing, Nikki said, her metal fingers brushing over one of the flowers on the wall. I've seen flowers in flower shops before, but never just growing out of the ground. I'm sure you have, though. Technically, yes. The Pythia had seen rows of flower beds planted in the palace, sprouting from soft dirt engineered to provide the optimal growing conditions for whatever took root inside of it. Again, though, it was controlled. The flowers were uniform, any imperfect specimens pulled out before they could reach maturity so a proper one could take its place. Nikki's flowers were made of paint, but Nikki's flowers were made of paint. Some were misshapen, some drooped lower than their friends, and some probably weren't based on real flowers at all. But they felt real, and he supposed that's all that mattered in the end. "Yours are better," he told her without a hint of a lie in his voice. Nikki blinked. "I doubt that. They are. Trust me." A beat passed. Nikki dropped her hand from the wall. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping away from the wall and towards her bed. The Pythia watched Nikki dig through the colorful blankets strewn over the mattress, muttering to herself as she tossed them aside to try and find what she was looking for. After a few moments, she pulled out her black sketchbook and grinned. "Come here. I want to show you some sketches I've been working on," Nikki then told him, patting the spot on the mattress next to her. Sitting down beside her, a chill ran up his spine when her metal shoulder brushed against his own. He didn't mind the cold, though, and leaned closer to get a better look at the sketchbook on her lap. Nikki had flipped the book open to a page covered in sketches of birds. Some were small, some were large. Some had dark feathers, and some were only streaked with dark stripes. A few were in flight while others were perched, their feathers puffed up to make them look bigger than they were. And all of them looked free. Completely and utterly free of any responsibilities or obligations, in a way that made his chest burn for reasons he couldn't explain. "I've been trying to practice drawing birds lately," Nikki said, her finger tracing a sparrow in mid-flight. "I've tattooed some birds onto Phil before, but those were only crows. I'm trying to branch out a bit." Looking at the sketches, he reached out, tracing his finger along a small bird that had a dark stripe across its eyes. "What's this one?" "It's a shrike," Nikki told him, her voice soft. "Shrikes are unique because they're songbirds that look delicate, but they're extremely aggressive hunters. They impale their prey to kill it, sometimes with their beaks, other times with things around them like thorns or fence posts." He stared at the drawing of the shrike on the page, and wondered if that was the bird living inside him. The bird had jabbed its beak through his ribs before, so who's to say it couldn't do it again? A songbird with a ruthless streak. That wasn't him. He wasn't made to be brutal like that. For some reason, the realization disappointed him. "That's intense," the Pythia said, lifting his hand away from the page. "I think it's a nice reminder not to underestimate people," Nikki said, flipping to another page in her sketchbook. "If you push someone too far, even the prettiest songbird could impale you." The Pythia clenched his jaw, unsure of what to say to that. Thankfully, or maybe regretfully, before he could think of a response, there was a knock on Nikki's door. Nikki shut her sketchbook and pushed to her feet. "Who is it?" "It's Punk." "Oh, that was unexpected." Although the Pythia's heart began to pound in his chest, knowing that someone else who had been on the side of killing him was standing outside the door, he gave Nikki a small nod to tell her it was okay to open it. Nikki gave him an unsure look, but after a beat, turned to open the door, Hey, Punk. What's up? The Pythia didn't miss how Nikki angled her body in front of the door to block the view of him sitting on her bed. Well, I went to your parlor earlier and you went there. But Sam needs those enchantment sketches from you as soon as possible, so I figured you might be here. Oh, shit, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. She glanced over her shoulder back at the Pythia, before her gaze flickered to the sketchbook still sitting on the mattress. I have them right here, so just, Taking a breath, she gave the Pythia an apologetic look as she stepped out of the way of the door. Yeah, just let me grab them. Without Nikki in the way, the Pythia immediately locked eyes with Ponk behind his blindfold. As always, Ponk's mouth was covered by a red and yellow face mask, a shock of white blonde hair sticking out from the hood he had pulled over his head. Tommy's out with Jack on a supply run, Nikki explained before Ponk could ask, frantically flipping through her sketchbook. I'm keeping an eye on him while he's gone. Oh, okay. To the Pythia's surprise, Ponk didn't seem particularly upset about him being in Nikki's room. He didn't even seem worried. If anything, he just looked curious, his brows furrowing above his dark eyes as he looked the Pythia up and down. You, doing alright? What? Both Nikki and the Pythia froze, frowning at Ponk as he stepped fully into Nikki's bedroom. You're asking me how I am? The Pythia questioned. Ponk nodded. Yeah, haven't really gotten a chance to talk to you before, so... He trailed off, clearly unsure where he was going with that. The Pythia frowned. The closest we got to having a conversation was when you were telling the group it was a good idea to kill me. Nikki paled, while Ponk blinked. I wasn't saying it was a good idea. Just thought it was something we should talk about. He paused, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry about that, though. Things went a bit far with that. Yeah, no shit, Nikki huffed, folding her arms over her chest. It's nothing personal against you, Ponk continued, ignoring Nikki's scowl. It was just us trying to think about what's safest for the group. But Sam's pretty paranoid, so he has a tendency to push things too hard if he's worried. Pythia shrugged. I mean, you don't have to explain it to me. I agreed with you guys, remember? Something sad flashed over both Nikki and Ponk's faces at the reminder. Yeah, that's why I'm asking how you're doing. Why do you care? The Pythia asked, his heartbeat picking up speed. You want me dead? The Pythia Ponk shook his head. I don't want you dead, and neither does Sam. We just don't want anything to happen to our group. Keeping his hands empty and visible at his sides, Ponk took a careful step forward, and Nikki tensed. I get that you don't trust me after that. And after that, because I wouldn't either. But I am the doctor here, which means I have a responsibility to make sure everyone in the temple is doing okay. What, are you asking if you can do a checkup on me? The Pythia scoffed. Are you in any pain? Ponk asked, the question completely sincere. No, the Pythia answered. Nikki shot him a confused look, which Ponk raised an eyebrow at. Nikki? Well, Nikki hesitated, glancing between him and Ponk. You said you get headaches. Damn it, Nikki. The Pythia bit back a sigh and shook his head. I told you, it's not a big deal. Headaches? Ponk questioned. Great. The doctor who had been arguing that they needed to consider killing him was just about the last person he wanted to talk about his headaches to. But it seemed like Nikki had given him no choice. It's just a side effect of the blindfold, he explained, looking down at his lap. While the enchantment on the fabric lets me see through it, it's not perfect and puts a subtle haze over my vision, so when I wear it for too long, I get headaches. Ponk frowned. But you have to wear that practically all hours of the day, right? The Pythia nodded, and Ponk sucked in a sharp breath. That's not ideal. It's manageable, the Pythia argued. Still, there are ways we can ease that pain, Ponk pointed out. While trying to figure out how to fix the enchantment might be too tricky. We can at least get you painkillers or something to reduce the headaches. That's what we were thinking, Nikki chimed in. Do you have any he could just keep a bottle of or something? Another flash of discomfort crossed Ponk's face. Well, I don't have a bottle he could hold on to, but I could give you or Tommy the pills whenever he needs them. There was something unsaid in Ponk's words that the Pythia couldn't figure out. Nikki clearly knew, though, understanding dawning across her face as she nodded at him. Yeah, we can work that out. I'm guessing it has something to do with overdose. They don't want him to OD on painkillers. One second, I'm just looking at something. Let's see. Ponk nodded back at her, taking another step closer so he was standing right in front of the Pythia now. The Pythia's heart was pounding again, his skin buzzing and hands far too cold as he wrung them in his lap. You're free to say no, but would you mind if I touch your head really quick? That way you can tell me where it hurts when you get these headaches. Although the Pythia's anxiety was scraping the back of his throat, Nikki gave him a reassuring look, and he knew she wouldn't let Ponk do anything to him. Besides, he was getting really tired of the headaches, and it would be nice if he could find at least some small measure of relief. Digging his nails into his palm, the Pythia nodded, and Ponk knelt down in front of him. Okay, let me just... Ponk reached out, keeping his hands visible at all times as he lightly grabbed the sides of the Pythia's head. He tapped his temples and raised an eyebrow. Does it hurt here? No, the Pythia said, surprised that Ponk's prosthetic hand was just as warm as his organic one. It's a bit further back. Ponk frowned and moved his hands to the top of the Pythia's skull. Here? Yeah, it's, like a tight band wrapping around. It's the worst there, but it sometimes wraps around my forehead and the back of my head, too. Ah, I see. Ponk moved his hands away from his head, but then dug into his jacket, pulling out a stethoscope from one of the pockets and looping it around his neck. Do you mind if I listen to your heartbeat really quick? The Pythia gave him another nod, his heart speeding up even more as the stethoscope approached his chest. Okay, breathe in when I tell you. He went through the motions, breathing in and out at Ponk's instruction. Nikki stood over Ponk's shoulder the whole time, eyes narrowed like she was prepared to jump in at any second. It was strangely reassuring, knowing that Nikki was ready to protect him if anything went awry. Once he was done, Ponk put the stethoscope back in his jacket and gave him a solemn look. Your heartbeat is going very quickly, he pointed out. The Pythia did his best to keep his face neutral. Yeah, that happens. Are you anxious right now? Although the Pythia felt pinned under the weight of Ponk and Nikki's gazes, he found himself nodding anyway. A bit. Ponk nodded. Does this happen often? Anxiety spikes? I mean, put yourself in my shoes. Wouldn't you be pretty anxious too? The Pythia asked, trying to sound sarcastic, but coming across as nervous instead. Ow. Ow. That's fair, Ponk agreed. Have you ever had a panic attack before? Before? I don't know how Ponk says before. Ponk's accent is one of the hardest for me to do because I don't really watch them that often, and yeah. And it's a very unique accent as well. Ugly sobs forced their way out of his chest, over and over again as he gripped onto Tommy. Yeah, I had a lot of them when I was a kid, but they got less frequent as I got older. But then I had one a few days ago, too. The Pythia admitted, red crawling up his cheeks. Tommy helped me calm down, though. That's good. So you know how to recognize them and how to get through them? For the most part. The Pythia shrugged. Alright. If they get more frequent to the point of impairing your daily life, we can consider getting you some medication for it if you'd like. For now, though, I just wanted to make sure you knew what they were so you didn't think you were having a heart attack or something if you had one. I'm good. I know what they are. Why is it so much louder now? I swear. That's better. Nodding, Ponk pushed to his feet again, and despite the mask on his face, the Pythia had a feeling he was smiling at him. Okay, so I'll look into getting some painkillers for those headaches of yours. Let me know if anything gets worse for them, though. Thank you, Ponk, Nikki said, holding out some pieces of paper from her sketchbook for him to take. And here are the enchantments for Sam. Thanks. I'll let you know if he needs any changes, Ponk said, taking the papers and tucking them under his arm. I'll see you guys later. With that, Ponk headed out of the bedroom, the door slamming shut behind him. As soon as he was gone, the Pythia let out a breath he hadn't even realized he was holding. Sitting back down beside him, Nikki's shoulder pressed against his own. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't know he'd be stopping by." "It's okay," he reassured her. "He was nicer than I thought he'd be." Nikki pressed her lips together into a thin line. "Punk's a really nice person most of the time, so I'm glad you got to see that side of him." "As opposed to the side that wants me dead," the Pythia huffed, gaze falling back to his lap. "He doesn't want you dead," Nikki argued. "He and Sam are both just worried for our group. That's not any excuse, of course. That discussion shouldn't have happened in the first place. But neither of them have a personal vendetta against you." The Pythia shrugged, pulling his hands apart to see if they were still shaking. They were. "You told Ponk you're anxious, Reyna," Nikki said, and the Pythia glanced up to see she had noticed his trembling hands as well. "I've been anxious since Tommy left," the Pythia admitted, keeping his voice low. Or keeping his head low. "I know you're worried about him, but he and Jack are gonna be okay," Nikki reassured him, her words flowing over his skin and soothing the buzzing in his mind. "They'll come back." "How do you know, though?" the Pythia asked, his voice far weaker than he meant it to be. Nikki stared at the wall, something solemn falling over her face. "Because they have to. If they don't, then..." Her breathing hitched, and she squeezed her eyes shut. "I can't think that they won't. If I get too caught up in my head about it, I'll drown." The Pythia noticed how she curled in on herself, looking surprisingly small as she took long, steady breaths. In a split second, he found himself reaching for her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and pulling her into his side. For a moment, Nikki tensed. Then she relaxed, letting out a breath as her head rested on his shoulder. "You know, you and Tommy remind me of me and Jack in a way," Nikki said after several minutes of silence. "Really?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Nikki hummed. "Yep. You two just seem to click with each other the same way we did when we first met." His curiosity was piqued now. "How did you and Jack meet?" "I was 16 and Jack was 15, I think," Nikki began, her eyes going glassy as the memories flashed behind them. "I ran away from home because my parents wanted me to go to the academy to join the palace guard, and I refused to do it. I'd already figured out that I hated the way our country was being run. I hated the surveillance. I hated the Emperor for having so much power over everything. I hated how no one talked about anything but what fucking hover shoes to buy, what movies were playing, which celebrity got new cybernetics, and what Zon streamer got a brand deal up from the fucking military. It was driving me insane. And the palace was at the root of all of that. So I knew I wanted to stay far away from there." She paused and took a breath. Sorry. That's besides the point." basically, after I ran away, I joined, I guess you could call it a commune? Just a group of people who didn't want to participate in the bread and circuses that kept getting shoved in our faces, so we had our own place. There was this abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city that was supposed to be demolished decades ago, but never was. So we lived there as a group. We tried to grow our own food, but the air was too polluted for that. So we just all took odd jobs here and there and shared the funds so we could take care of each other. Jack joined a little after I showed up, and we just instantly got each other, you know? The Pythia nodded, not wanting to interrupt her, but wanting to make sure she knew he was listening. The thing was, while there was nothing wrong with the commune, I hated being there. Because even though we were separated from a lot of the bullshit, we weren't doing anything to fix the way things were. Most of the members were fine with that, but I wanted to do something besides just focusing on myself. And eventually I got Jack on my side too. Another pause. I met Techno when he needed someone to deliver a package across the city before him. Even though it was wrapped, the second he handed it to me, I knew it was a weapon of some kind, but I didn't say anything. He hired me a few more times after that, and I figured out that he was taking action, I guess is a good way to put it. Did you know he was a deathling? The Pythia questioned. Nikki shook her head. No, I had no clue. I just knew he was involved in the kind of activism I wanted to do, so I told him one day I knew what he was doing and asked if I could join. But he, kind of brushed it off, which I don't blame him for since I was just a teenager he barely knew. I wasn't planning on giving up, though. I told myself I was going to ask him about it until he let me join whatever he was doing. And I told Jack all about it, too. This time, when Nikki paused, her shoulders tensed. A few days later, the police raided the commune. Said we were squatting there illegally, despite the fact that the place wasn't being used for anything. Then, her breathing hitched. The official reports say one of the commune members started the fire. That's a lie, though. It was one of the cops. They must have decided to set it when it became clear we weren't going to leave. Although Nikki's pants covered her shin, the Pythia thought back to the dragon tattoo he knew was there. He'd theorized that it might have been related to a fire to get her to stop asking him questions. Nausea burned his throat when he realized he was right. Jack and I barely escaped with our lives, Nikki admitted, her voice small. That's how I got these. She twitched her prosthetic arms, but Jack got it even worse than I did. We both nearly died that day, and while we thankfully got debt forgiveness for the hospital bills, our burns were severe and we had nowhere to go. Suddenly, a small smile blossomed over Nikki's face. The thing was, though, that experience let me hear Lady Death for the first time. I could feel her with me, telling me I was going to be okay, making me feel safe in the most terrifying moment of my life. And while I'd never been opposed to Clara, I hated the way the government used her name to justify the horrible policies they put in place. So while Jack and I were trying to figure out what we were going to do next, I ran into Techno again, and he just knew. He knew that I'd seen her, so he told me what he actually did and asked if I still wanted to join. I talked it over with Jack, and since he felt Kristen too, we both decided we wanted to do it. Nikki straightened up, and the Pythia let his arm fall off her shoulders as she stretched her prosthetic arms above her head. I technically could have kept my arms, but my nerves were very messed up, and it would have taken years of regenerative therapy that I couldn't afford if I wanted to get full mobility back. So when Sam offered, I decided to go for it. She turned her hands over in front of her, eyes tracing the intricate designs in the purple metal. Jack didn't have much of a choice, though. It was then that Nikki bent over, pulling her pant leg up to reveal the dragon tattoo on her shin once more. Jack and I both have this. Phil did both of ours since I was pretty new to tattooing at the time and didn't feel ready to do them yet. A fond smile flickered over her face as she traced the dragon with her finger. That's the story behind it, though, since you asked about it a while back. The Pythia clenched his jaw. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm so sorry that happened. It's okay, Nikki reassured him, not even letting him finish his apology. You were in a shit situation, and I was asking you questions you didn't want to answer. But things are different now, so I figured I could tell you. In a way, nothing was different now from those first few days in the temple. The Pythia was still the Pythia. He was still a prisoner of the Deathlings. He had no idea what Clara had in mind for his future from here. But at the same time, everything had changed. He had the opportunity to escape, but he hadn't taken it. While he had no clue what Clara wanted from him, he wasn't sure if he even wanted to know. The only thing that still held true was that he was the Pythia, because that was a fact that he could never change. Except, Tommy didn't think of him as the Pythia. To Tommy, he was Wilbur. It wasn't true. He wasn't Wilbur because there had never really been a Wilbur. But Tommy refused to acknowledge that. He just kept pushing forward, calling him by that name no matter how many times he protested it. The Pythia thought of everything Nikki had just told him. How things were different now. Pythia? Nikki asked, scooting closer. Are you okay? In that conversation we had, when I first asked you about the dragon tattoo, you asked me if I wanted to become the Pythia when I was chosen, he said, wrapping his arms around himself. I didn't want this. I was dragged off the streets by palace guards and told Clara had chosen me. But it was never something I agreed to. A metal hand came to rest on his arm, and the coolness was a balm to the fire racing under his skin. You don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. Just because I told you my story doesn't mean you owe me anything back, Nikki told him softly. The Pythia shook his head. No, it's okay. I've already talked to Tommy a bit about this. He took a shaky breath, focusing on Nikki's hand on his sleeve. I was so scared. I didn't understand why I'd been chosen, or why I had to give up my name, or why I didn't have a say in any of it. I'm so sorry, Nikki whispered. That sounds horrible. The usual responses ran through the Pythia's mind. It's Claire's will. It's my purpose. It's the reason for my existence. He didn't say any of them. Suddenly, the bird in his chest was slamming its beak against his ribs again, hammering them over and over and over again like it was trying to tell him something. Like it wanted to break his ribs entirely but couldn't find the strength. A pressure formed in his throat. The words sat on the tip of his tongue, begging to be let out. The person I used to be. His breathing hitched, the hammering growing louder in his ears. The name I used to go by, well, it's not my name anymore. I gave it up. It's not me, but it used to be me, and I just... He wanted to tell Nikki that name. The name that wasn't his, but was spinning around his head all the same. He knew he shouldn't. The more people that knew that name, the more he was going to damn himself. But he had a feeling the bird in his chest wasn't going to stop tearing apart his insides until he forced the words out of his throat. My name was Wilbur, he whispered, the syllable of the name feeling foreign in his mouth. Immediately, the bird fell silent, and he let out a sigh of relief. A beat passed, then another. His heart pounded in his ears as he waited for Nikki to say something. Wilbur, she whispered back, warmth from her voice wrapping around the name like it was something precious. The bird crooned. He flinched. I gave that name up for Clara. It'd be against the Pythian tenets for anyone to use it, he clarified, the words tumbling out of him in a rush. I just wanted you to know it. He forced himself to look at Nikki again, and his breath caught in his throat when he saw the pain reflected in her eyes. That's okay, she told him, although he could practically feel the sadness in her words. Thank you for telling me. Another croon reverberated through his chest. For the first time all day, he felt a relieved smile tugging at the corners of his lips. When Nikki smiled back, warmth bloomed in his chest, the ache in his ribs fading as if it had never been there in the first place. Drink break. After that, the two fell into a comfortable silence. Nikki readjusted the pillows on her mattress, resting her sketchbook on her leg so she could draw a few more designs. He settled himself beside her so he could watch her draw, but the emotional roller coaster he'd gone through seemed to have worn him out, because it wasn't long before his eyes started drooping. His anxiety had burnt itself out. Tommy was going to be back soon. But for now, Nikki was here, and he was okay with that. He trusted her, and found himself drifting to sleep without a second thought. He woke up to the sound of someone hammering on a door. I don't know who the voice belongs to, so I'm just gonna go to default. Nikki! Nikki, are you in there? You need to get out here! The Pythia bolted upright, realizing he had fallen asleep in Nikki's room. He whipped his head around and spotted Nikki a few feet away from him, eyes shut and sketchbook sliding off her lap. Before the Pythia could try to wake her, the knocking got louder. Okay, it's Ainsley, okay. Nikki! The voice on the other side, which the Pythia was pretty sure belonged to Ainsley, shouted. At this, Nikki jerked awake. She blinked a few times, jolting when she noticed the Pythia sitting beside her, only to relax a half a second later. Ainsley, is that you? Nikki called out, stumbling to her feet with the Pythia right behind. She opened the door to the bedroom, the Pythia rubbing at his eyes behind his blindfold as he peered over her shoulder to see what was going on. Sure enough, Ainsley stood on the other side. Their eyes were wide, cheeks blotchy as they took in the sleep-must state both of them were in. What's going on? Nikki asked, stifling a yawn with her hand. Ainsley clenched their jaw. It's Tommy and Jack. They're back from the run. There was no relief in Ainsley's words. This wasn't good news. Both of them stiffened, the haze of sleep dissipating in an instant. Where? Nikki asked. The main chamber, but... Before Ainsley could finish their sentence, Nikki was shoving past them and sprinting out of her room. The Pythia followed, his heart pounding in his ears as he tried to figure out what could have gone wrong. They'd made it back, so that should have been good news. But it wasn't, which meant at least one of them was hurt. Fuck, maybe they were both hurt. But it couldn't be that bad if they'd made it back to the temple, right? The Pythia didn't know. He didn't know, but his heart was slamming against his ribs, and the bird was screaming at him to run faster as he followed Nikki down the hall and into the main chamber of the temple. Distantly, he realized he hadn't been this scared since the night he'd been kidnapped. How ironic that the ice in his veins was no longer for himself, but for the very boy who dragged him down here in the first place. He spotted Tommy as soon as he ran into the main chamber, and a rock dropping into his stomach the second he laid his eyes on him. Tommy was standing a bit in front of the main door, his face blank as his chest heaved up and down. His clothes were torn and blood was splattered across the side of his face. He stared at nothing, ignoring the flurry of activity going on only a few feet away from him. Without thinking, the Pythia ran for him. Tommy! Suddenly, awareness flickered in Tommy's eyes. Fuck. He was okay. He was alive. Completely forgetting about the other deathlings, the Pythia slammed into Tommy, gasping for air as he hugged Tommy as tightly as he could. For a moment, Tommy didn't react. He stayed as stiff as a board, his arms pinned to his sides. Right when he was considering pulling away, though, a shudder ran down Tommy's spine, Suddenly, he was gripping the back of the Pythia's sweater tight enough to tear it if someone tried to pull it away. "You okay?" he whispered into Tommy's hair, pulling back to see his face. His eyes darted around the blood splatter, trying to see if it had come from Tommy or someone else. When he couldn't see a source for the blood, another wave of relief washed over him. "The blood isn't yours," he said, waiting for Tommy to confirm. Tommy clenched his jaw and shook his head. "Some of it, but most of it, no," he said, quieter than he'd ever been. Something was still wrong. The realization hit him like a slap to the face, and he pulled back a bit more, running his hands down Tommy's arms to see if he could find any other injuries. The rush of protectiveness was completely foreign to him, but he didn't push it away. He let it make itself a home in his chest as he pushed Tommy's jacket sleeves up, wincing when he saw more blood staining his hands. "What's going on?" he asked, noticing bruises already forming on Tommy's arms. "What happened?" Tommy took a breath. His eyes darted to the right, where the others had gathered around Jack for reasons the Pythia hadn't bothered to find out yet. He could hear Nikki's panicked voice echoing over the others, but he was too focused on Tommy to make out what she was saying. Suddenly, though, a new voice rang out above all the others. "You tried to kill me!" The Pythia whipped his head over and saw Jack, with a torn jacket and blood smeared across the side of his face, pointing a shaky finger at the two of them. "Tommy tried to fucking kill me!" The rock in his stomach grew larger as he looked back to Tommy, and noticed that he wasn't saying anything to defend himself. He risked another glance back over at Jack, and saw Nikki wrapping her arm around his shoulders to help him up. For the briefest of moments, their eyes met. Betrayal. That was the only thing he could see flashing through Nikki's gaze. The bird fell dead silent. "Oh, come on, don't end it on that! What do you mean? What do you mean? That's so... There's no way... Tommy and Jack are friends. What could have possibly happened that would make him betray him on a dime? Like, what do you mean? Ugh. Unfortunately, my voice can never handle reading anything more than a chapter of things on stream. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to end it on the cliffhanger. We're gonna have to end the stream on a cliffhanger. Fuck, man. Damn. Excuse me. Jeez. What's this filter thing? I don't know why there's a 1 there, but oh well. Alright. That's gonna be my stream. What am I doing? That's what I'm doing. Alright. Thank you so much for watching, or listening, or whatever. Lurkers, always welcome as well. I think my next stream might be either reading the next chapter of this, or MCC Island, like it normally is, or something else Minecraft. Who knows? I'm trying to think of the phrase, but I can't remember what it is. I'm a loose cannon, I think is what I was trying to say. Not sure though. Anyway, thank y'all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.